Welcome to Access Denied, the tragic story of 15 million children locked outside the schoolhouse door and how we can fix that. My name is Dirk and I'll be your host. Have you had internet issues during the pandemic? Spotty Wi Fi, too many Zooms going on at once, that dreaded frozen screen? Now imagine you're one of the tens of millions of households with no broadband access at all, or the 15 million children locked out of the virtual schoolhouse, unable to communicate with teachers, peers, or even access the curriculum. Who holds the keys to these doors? It's broadband providers. And let's be real. Have you ever called a cable company for customer service? It starts with a lie and it gets worse from there. Your call is important to us. We'll be there as soon as we can. No, it's not. And no, you won't. We have complaints of folks being on the phone for 13 hours trying to get internet for their kids. 13 hours and they still didn't get internet. We have empowered these billion-dollar companies, giving them the keys to the virtual schoolhouse with millions of underserved children relying on their tender mercies. There has to be a better way, and there is. This show, Access Denied, will chronicle America's digital apartheid, telling the stories of the lockdown and tracing the path of how we got here. We'll chronicle the villains as well as the sheroes and heroes that are finding solutions. We need you to join us in changing the rules of the game, and we need to make sure that every family that needs broadband can get it. In the age of COVID, this is more than just an equity issue. It can be one of life and death. My deep dive into the digital divide started with a Facebook message I received from a parent who tried to access Comcast Internet Essentials, the free internet service they were giving during COVID. But one of those little asterisks stopped her. It's not really free. They're preconditions. Do you now or have you ever owed a debt to this cable provider? Do you have a $99 deposit when you can't feed your kids? What is your social security number, even if you don't have one? These are just some of the barriers families ran into in Oakland during a pandemic. Within 15 minutes, we started a petition and had a couple thousand signatures. Comcast community rep called us. We had a very forthright conversation about the situation on the ground and the effect it was having on children. And they changed their conditions. They took all preconditions out in Oakland and nationally. At least that's what it says on paper. And last I knew, that was set to expire June 30th. The problem is not just Comcast, and it's not just Oakland, though. There are over 700 cable providers in thousands of localities, and everywhere had the same story. And it's 15 million children that are missing school, that have missed school for 3 months, that will continue to miss school. Zach Wright, who will be joining us from Philly, the birthplace of Comcast, and other activists had the same exact story we had in Oakland. So we worked together to start a national petition of the FCC, the body charged with regulating the public airways, asking that they require broadband companies to provide free, no strings attached internet to every family that needs it. They could do this in the stroke of a pen. They could require that broadband companies provide free, no strings attached internet to families that need it, even if it costs those of us who can pay a little bit more. I think most of us would pitch in a little bit more to our cable bill to know that everyone else could get online. So far, we have almost 30,000 signatures, including the former Education Secretary Arnie Duncan. We have Jeb Bush. We're both sides of the aisle. We're from cities to rural areas, from sea to shining sea. We need this, so please sign and share it. We need a universal solution for disconnected Americans, internet for all. So please join us as we build coalitions, call out villains, propose real solutions, and join the Internet for All push that can have us emerge from COVID with a more durable and equitable broadband infrastructure that serves children and families rather than cable company profits. We need you. And more importantly, the 15 million unconnected children need you. Their educational futures literally depend on it. So please join us. And now I'd like to introduce today's guest, my brother, my homie, Zach Wright. I'll do an intro on Zach, but you can talk a little bit about yourself too, brother. Zach's a national finalist for the 2018 U.S. DOE School Ambassador Fellowship. He's a communication activist at Ed Post. Zach's an assistant professor of practice at Relay Graduate School of Education, serving Philly and Camden. Prior to that, Zach was a 12th grade world literature and AP literature teacher at Mastery Charter School Shoemaker campus, where he taught for 8 years, including the school's first 8 graduating classes. That's pretty tight. Over his more than 10 years in Philadelphia classroom, he was named Philly's Outstanding Teacher in 2013, created a relationship between Mastery Schools and UVM to grant near full ride scholarships for underrepresented students. And he's participated in the fight for equitable education funding by testifying before Philly's Board of Education, as well as in the State House Rotunda in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He's a regular columnist for Ed Post. I'd love to just welcome you to the show, Zach, and thank you for joining us today. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Dirk. It's a pleasure.
Appreciate you, brother. So I talked a little bit about this. I'd love to hear just a little about your approach to teaching, and some of the teaching work you've done. And I think later we'll get into like how is that affected by the current situation where we're distance learning basically across the country.
Sure. The foundation of my teaching, and I think all really good teaching, is relationships with students. Everything is about relationships with students. Everything is about rapport, about understanding, about teachers doing their own about their own implicit bias work, their own anti-racism work, for in particular white teachers to really dive into their own inherent racism and what that happens in the classroom. All of this work needs to be done, and it's all about relationships with students and understanding communities that they serve. Boom. What gets tricky then is what happens when that physical distance blocks the ability to create a relationship. What do you do? It's not impossible, but it is difficult. That being said, it is impossible if a student cannot connect to school, and that's where we come into this really a breach of civil rights for these students, which is where I kind of, when we first started talking, that's how I first started thinking about it. If a student is wheelchair bound, then the school needs a ramp to serve them.
Thank you.
If a family is low income, they are provided food.
Yeah, it's
the same guarantee. If in this pandemic, post-COVID world, my child needs an internet connection to access education, well, that it needs to be provided. That to protect and ensure their civil right to an education.
Yeah, and let me even up the ante on that a little bit. There's truancy laws. And it's compulsory that you send your kid to school. So you could be found to be a chronic truant. Theoretically, you could be thrown in jail because your kid doesn't have internet and can't attend school, and he's labeled chronic truant, and you're not able to get him or her to be non-chronically truant. We force children to go to school, and then we don't provide an access avenue for them to come. So again, it seems like a failure on our part as a society to just serve the basic needs of students. And we've seen that. I don't know if you have more to say on that. I'd love to hear more about Philly and Camden as well, but just what are your thoughts on that? Like, this is even different than like something that's just voluntary. We force kids to go to school.
Yeah, and the way that plays into my mind right now is that when we therefore hold them truant, or we therefore say, well, like, they're not on, sorry, we are blaming the oppressed rather than the oppressor. Very often you hear this word like the achievement gap. It's not an achievement gap, right? It's an opportunity gap. So we are not blaming the students for the achievement gap. Assumes that the students could achieve if they wanted to, rather than the opportunity gap, which says that the education system is structured so that students who are from marginalized communities are not given access to quality education. It's the same thing with the internet access. We cannot say, well, our students are now further behind and imply that it's their fault. No, it's our fault for not ensuring that they had the access that we needed. And when we were first talking about this, I remember sitting down literally with my 7-year-old son, first grade, next to me on his tablet, accessing school, sitting in all of his white privilege. And I was just like, he is benefiting from privileges he has not earned. And that is happening all over the country. And that's what needs to be stopped. And that's what happens. That's what happens in Philadelphia and in Camden and indeed all over the country.
Yeah. No, in Oakland, even before this, we knew only 40% of Black families had broadband. And half of had missed, of all families in Oakland, had missed a utility payment in the year before COVID even hit. And so the plans that folks are going to pay for internet now as a way to even be able to access school when they can't pay for groceries, we're exacerbating the opportunity gap deliberately. And the thing I'd love to say about the white privilege of your kids is like all kids should have that privilege. That should be American privilege, is the privilege to be online, the right to be online. It shouldn't even be a privilege. It should be the right to be online. And I appreciate folks like Ms. Elverum, who's been doing this work longer than us on this. Like, I think we've known about this being an issue, but I think we've been thrown into the fire by COVID in some ways. Yeah, and just looking at the Philly stuff, I saw that there was, the district bought 81,000 Chromebooks, and then kids still couldn't get online. And that, again, what is going on?
So, I mean, Philadelphia, it's the poorest big city in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And next door Camden is very and in 2018 about 15,000 students did not have a computer at home, and right now about just under 22,000 don't have home internet. So an already cash-strapped district within a state with very regressive funding formula, so that Philadelphia students get about $14,000 per year in state funding, whereas the wealthy suburb next door gets 28,000. You now have a cash-strapped district that is spending money that they probably don't have on Chromebooks to give to students that they cannot use. So what that created was this, it began trending. It was parking lot Wi-Fi. Damn. It was saying, and again, remember, the Comcast is based in Philadelphia, right? That's where it calls home. And within the city, where the fifth largest internet provider calls home, students and teachers were driving to parking lots to access public Wi-Fi. And it became such a thing that local activist groups, Philly Tech Justice and Yeah Philly, started these campaigns of photographing themselves going to a parking lot to access school. Not only is that a horrible breach of justice and a breach of dignity,
thank you,
it also goes counter to the narrative that these families don't care, because these families are doing so much just to get their share of what should be already their birthright, should already be their birthright. And what to me is even crazier about this is when you think about Comcast. Just this past January, they received almost $13 billion in tax cuts from the Trump tax laws. They get $18 million in Pennsylvania tax breaks. They have a 20% property tax cut from Philadelphia itself. They made $85 billion in profit in 2017 and $94.5 billion in profit in 2018.
Dang.
And when Superintendent Dr. Height of Philadelphia Schools asked them to turn on the residential Wi-Fi, they said no. They just said no. And to me, that's like, well, you have now shown your hand. We now know where your values are, and your values are not with the students and the families of the city of Philadelphia, where you call home.
And the reality, and the public airwaves that they use are the public airwaves. That's what really bothers me about this. It would be one thing if you got a McDonald's and you want to charge more for a Big Mac. It's another thing when you have the public airwaves, you're authorized by the government to do this. And the government sets the conditions in which you can do this. And the government right now is not setting in any conditions, it seems like. It's basically like you can rob and take advantage and price gouge during a crisis and walk away richer and with no consequence. And the reality, even with these free internet things, they're not free forever. They're free for a certain period of time, and then you're on a contract. So this is not something they're just giving away to folks out of the kindness of their heart. This is something where they're signing customers up. It's a marketing ploy long term, and everybody's going to have to be online. So now they're getting 15 million more customers potentially who will eventually have to pay. And so that's the system we're setting up for folks, which just seems like we're creating a system that's built on exploitation. and it may be $9.95 this month, it may be $19.95 in 2 months, it may be $39.95 in 6 months. But you got to get your kid to school.
And you mentioned the Internet Essentials package, and my first thought when all of this started was, well, let's just get that package for everybody. And then a brilliant man at Philly Tech Justice, he schooled me a little bit. He was like, well, we don't want to increase their market share, right? We don't want to just increase that now they have a complete monopoly over the city, and so that kind of raises the question, like, how do we bridge this gulf, this unnecessary constructed gulf? How do we bridge this in a way that doesn't actually put more money into the pockets of the oppressive system? How do we do that? To me, when I think about the federal government's role in education, it's the insurer of civil rights. Now they, right, historically may have done a kicking and screaming and begrudgingly and at the last possible, like, as it is not what they want to do. But within the federal, like the tiered system of education from federal to state to local, the feds are about, their role should be protecting the civil rights of American students.
Yeah.
Right now, there are 15 million students, probably more, 15 million students who are being denied access to education.
Yeah.
And it is another spoke in the wheel of oppression where these are the same families, the same marginalized communities, city, rural, like all over, Black, brown, poor.
Yeah.
It's just another spoke in the wheel of oppression that says, sorry, you don't have a leg up. And we keep telling ourselves that education is the lather up, that meritocracy is the thing, and it's not. It's not. It's rigged. And we need to dismantle this system to ensure that my 7-year-old boy is having the same exact access as any other child. And I would say, as a white family, if that means me having less, yes, let's do it. Because as people have said, and I love this idea, equity to the privileged is going to feel like oppression.
Yeah.
It's going to feel like it, but that's what we need. That's what we need, because my family is basking in privilege that we have not fully earned, and that needs to change.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I talked to some of my friends who are largely blessed around their homeschooling experiences, which are challenging for them. But I'm just like, so imagine what's going on with these other families that are just struggling to get online, that struggle with their own literacy at times and struggle with their own technological literacy too, in terms of getting their kids that are younger online and supporting them. And let's really just think about, like, we're blessed to even be in this position, and like, what do we owe to those that were not born with the luck that we were? And it literally is an accident of birth. It's nothing that your kid did to earn his spot. You know, the blessings that I've had, there's nothing I did to earn those blessings. I was just born into some of those. And I think we need to recognize that and really move forward from that. So I'd love to hear another piece of this puzzle is there's almost like 500,000 educators who are not online too. So what does that mean?
It's another one of those unknowns where, like, we don't know what it means. When I think about the teachers who I serve, so I serve brand new teachers in Philadelphia and Camden. When I think about teaching them how, like, the basics of teaching, if I also have to think about, by the way, here's not only how you put together a lesson plan. Here's not only how you put together an engaging lesson. Here's not also how you engage students both in person and virtually. But also, here's how you find a public Wi-Fi spot to do it. That's outrageous. And I say it's outrageous, but I don't say it's surprising. We value what we pay for. And we don't value our teachers. Now, this is not to say that all teachers are amazing and need to stay in the classroom. Some teachers are awful and need to go. Like any industry.
Yeah.
Like any industry, there are some that are amazing, a lot that are good, and some that are awful.
Yeah.
And it's just like, so education is not special like that. What is special, though, is that I think it's in Montana, if a family of 4 had a one income and that one income was a teacher, they would be living in poverty. That tells you what we care about. We don't really care about education because we don't care about those whose job it is to give education. So when I think about 400,000 teachers across the country going to trying to find Wi-Fi to teach their students, what that also tells me is that those teachers, who are probably the youngest teachers, who are probably the most inexperienced teachers, are probably also the teachers serving the schools of students who are also marginalized and under-resourced.
Yeah.
Because I don't have the data on this, but it would not surprise me if you looked at the teaching population of 2 districts, one predominantly of wealth and predominantly white versus one predominantly in living in poverty and maybe predominantly minority, that you would see, because we already know that the least experienced teachers go to the schools that are the most under-resourced.
Yeah.
Those teachers are probably the ones who don't have internet access at home, so it just compounds on itself. The inequities and the injustices just compound upon themselves, and this is why we need the federal government to step in. If they're not going to step in, then we need to guilt the market so that they do it. Because right now, as Americans, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. Not only, I mean, with everything with COVID resurging, that's an embarrassment. And to have students in the wealthiest nation in the world, to have one student not be able to get online would be an embarrassment. And we have 15 million. That's outrageous.
It is. And it can be done. That's what I like. I like your thoughts around like just being hostage of the cable companies and moving beyond that model. I do think we either need to regulate them into submissions where they're just doing what we need them to do, or we need to get rid of them. There are cities that are doing internet broadband citywide. Kerala, India, has citywide free broadband. Again, some of the kids have to get on their roofs to get a good connection, but Kerala, India, has citywide broadband. And we can't do that in Philly or Oakland. Like, again, as you said, I think it really is, where are our priorities in this country? And again, this ain't nothing new about who we serve and who we don't serve. It tends to just evolve in the way that it looks. But I do feel like we're at a moment right now where we are taking a harder look as a country at who we serve and who we don't serve. And so I hope that we emerge from this really thinking about how we just change the infrastructure. As you said, I just think as long as we're relying on Comcast and Xfinity and AT&T, they really have no interest in making sure low-income kids are online unless those kids can pay. And I think we're always going to bump against that wall if that's the actors we're dealing with on this.
I agree, and I think about, I live in a small suburb outside of Philadelphia, and I think about what I can do, like what every little individual can do. And I think a lot of times people just don't know. They just don't know. So every parent I talk to, when they come say like, oh God, this remote learning, this, that, and the third, I'm like, yeah, but we have access though. Did you know there are 15 million who didn't? And they're like, what?
Yeah.
They're like, yeah. And did you know that like 20,000 of them live across the bridge? Like that's outrageous. So the level of maybe like embraced ignorance or embraced naivete, but like people just don't know. And I think the more people say, the more we say like, this is what's happening. And that's why the parking lot Wi-Fi was so powerful, because those images are searing for any family. And I do believe it, and I do believe that it is incumbent upon any family with the blessings, as you say, to have access. I believe it's incumbent to them fight for those who don't. I don't know if that comes from being raised as a Jewish man, where that's part of our world, right? You don't harvest all of your field, you leave some. And that's what we need to do. We need to say, this isn't about my kid. This is about all of our kids. And I'm also thinking about my wife is a critical care nurse, and she works in the COVID unit of South Jersey, and she's doing that work. And I think it's all connected, that we all need to do all of this work for each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a buddy who's a rabbinical student who gave this great sermon around that, really about being disturbed to action, that we should be disturbed by this moment. We should see what's in front of us and pay attention to it. And that should disturb us to action ultimately. And again, I think another piece he said that I thought was powerful is we may not be guilty, but we're responsible. Folks who are privileged may not have built segregated housing or created those policies or distributed devices in the way they did, but they benefit from those policies now. And it's up to folks to be responsible around that. And it's not about guilt. It's about responsibility, and what we owe each other right now is compatriots, as brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very much not about guilt. I thank you for raising that, because and this goes into other conversations. But guilt, particularly white guilt or white privilege guilt, is completely self-serving and does absolutely nothing. It might be a necessary step on that path towards being an anti-racist co-conspirator, but it needs to be a very short stay. Like, get over it. Like, get over it. Like, yeah, like, and let's keep it moving, because your guilt does nothing to dismantle anything.
Yeah.
So that needs to be a very short stay in the process.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So I'd just love to hear from you. Like, what would it mean to have internet for all if every family that needed broadband internet of a certain capacity could just get that as a matter of right? What would that mean?
Well, I mean, one thing it would mean is that we were finally taking one more step towards living up to our so-called ideals. It seems from the country's founding, we talk an extraordinary game. But it would be one more step towards that. It will be one more step towards access. And if we want to believe that we are a country where individual ability is really the definer, then access is the key to it.
Right on.
Access for all, that should be the given. It should be the given. And anybody who says otherwise has internet. And that's the thing, right? It's always not. It's always like they don't need it, but I got it. Yeah. So what would it mean? It would mean closing gaps, unnecessary gaps, and again, not achievement gaps, because it's nothing students are doing, right? It's closing opportunity gaps.
Yeah.
It also means, like, if every student had access, if every student had the ability to learn, to wonder something, ask a question, and learn about it, who knows what these children can become? Who knows? These 50 million students without internet who aren't going to school right now, who knows who they could become if they had the access, the educational foundation that can be built upon. Who knows what invention, what economy driving innovation that these students can create? Who knows, like, what college they can access to take families upwards in the trajectory of the middle class and upper class? That's the thing that boggles my mind when folks think that it's about us and them, and it's like, no. Like, students learning is for all of us. Yeah. It's for all of us. So when I think about Comcast in Philadelphia, the poorest big city in the country, and I think about the fifth largest the fifth largest company in the country is in Philadelphia, and all these students, I'm thinking about, like, they could be your next innovators. And this comment is fascinating, though. Right on, that maybe that's the problem.
Yeah.
Right. That maybe that's the problem. That maybe what they could become is what's preventing that. Now, I'm going to have to think on that.
Yeah.
Because that is powerful and a thing. What I hope, therefore, is that soon those kids will outnumber. That these kids, that the new generations will look so different from the previous generations, and then we'll just rise to power and change stuff.
Yeah.
So when I think about me as an educator, when I think about me as a educator of educators, I think of this as like, it is our role to teach in our classrooms. It is our role to not, it is my role to teach teachers that they are teaching within a broken system, and that when they teach, they need to teach in a revolutionary manner in order to break down these systems.
Right on.
It's challenging work. It's necessary work. It's work that, frankly, I did not get early enough in my teaching career. And it's work that needs to be done. So when I think about what it would mean for these students to have access, I think about their futures.
Yeah.
I think about their futures. And again, when I think about their futures, I think about all of our futures.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's the two parts of it. Like, you know, Bill Gates would be nobody if he grew up in rural Alabama without a computer right now. If he was born there, he would never be Bill Gates. He'd never have the opportunity to be Bill Gates. Just Zuckerberg, none of these guys would have an opportunity to be the person they are if they were born into a family that did not have internet. That their future would be destroyed. And the comment from the sister was actually pretty deep, I think, around like, that is the fear. And I think historically, you know, again, Black folks were prohibited from reading. As a punish, you could be punished, a white person, for teaching a Black person to read.
Right.
So the greatest fear of this country in some ways has been the power of the people that it's oppressed.
Sure.
And if they rose up and really threw those chains off. I do have faith, though, as you did. I think the young people right now are actually just better overall. And they really are. Like, they're better, they're smarter, they're more courageous. They're able to kind of see beyond they're the fish that can see outside of the water they're swimming in sometimes. And I think a lot of those kids have been leading these pushes for equity in a just more sustained and real way. You know, I work with schools in Staten Island, and when Eric Garner was killed, only Black folks marched. It was only in the Black part of Staten Island. Now all the white folks are marching through the white parts of Staten Island, and that's like revolutionary to me in its own way, because Staten Island, its own kind of interesting spot.
Yeah.
And so to see those folks, to see older white people call George Floyd's death a murder, is really deep to me. And so I do think we have an opportunity now where I feel like the conscience is pricked. I don't know how long it'll be pricked.
Right.
But I do think there's an opportunity now for something to happen revolutionary around, like, what does full citizenship mean? How do we really guarantee that in a different way? That's, like you said, the Constitution's great on paper, not so great in practice in a lot of ways. How do we come out of this with actually kind of keeping those promises that were made at the beginning, to some people, not to everyone, obviously, but to really universalize those, which was the vision of the kind of the Reconstruction Amendments. So I think that's crucial. So I think we're getting kind of closer to the end. I'd love for you to hear a little bit more from you. Just, you know, what would you say to folks in Philly and elsewhere around what they should be doing? And then I think we're going to listen to an actual FCC complaint by an actor who's going to do a dramatic reenactment. I'd love to kind of hear your response to this. And again, there's thousands of these. There's probably a million of them that haven't ever been filed.
Right.
But what can folks do?
Well, so and Ms. Algren, who just posted that, is right on point. So one of the things that we are in the early talks with Philly Tech Justice, with Philly, and folks out of Baltimore, is to do a COVID conscious protest outside of Comcast Tower. There have been a lot of drive-by protests throughout the country to kind of highlight these things, and doing so in a COVID conscious manner. Right, I always have my critical care nurse in the back of my mind when I say these things. Because it's outrageous that not only it's something out of Orwell. Like, it's something that you can't even like imagine writing, right? They have the two tallest buildings in the city are the Comcast towers, right, in Philadelphia, and they just cast this shadow over the city. And what we need to do is we need to get folks to mass distantly outside the towers. And I'm talking students, families, teachers, teachers unions, charter folks, everybody, because so often there are these ineffectual schisms between all of us who are essentially all just trying to fight for kids. And if we just get over those schisms and say, like, this needs to happen. Like, if all of those folks came together, Comcast would not stand a chance.
Yeah.
If you have the city government, if you have the state, if you have the teachers union, if you have the charters, if you have the teachers, if you have the parents, if you have the University of Pennsylvania, Drexel, Temple, if you have all these folks come together and say, like, we cut you tax breaks out of our pockets.
Yeah.
And you are saying no. Literally, you are saying no to 20,000 of our children. Then here's the choice. You either pay taxes and we can use those taxes to build our own city broadband, or make it access.
Boom.
And we get these writings happening, and we make this happen, because when people hear what this is about, it's a no-brainer. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, and it is just blatant. It is just a blatant injustice. So what do we do? I think that is the next step. There are folks far smarter than me who are going to put the actual logistics together. But then we need the media. We need all different kinds of media to highlight this and raise it up. And to shame. Shame is a powerful tool. I try not to use it in my parenting, but I have no problem using it in politics.
Yeah. No, folks are getting rich off the backs of poor kids not going to school. And so that is shameful. And so I think we'd love to come back around when you guys do that. We'll support that in any way we can, obviously. It is going to take local actions like this. Ultimately, I feel like, again, we can't rely on every city to have to fight every cable company. The states and the Fed should really take this up on our behalf. But in the short term, it is going to take that. And it may take blooding the noses of some of these folks for them to feel the pain that our people are feeling right now every day and just struggling through this. And it, like you said, can you tell me the subsidy they got again?
So Comcast, they got $12.7 billion from the federal tax break. They got 18 million in Pennsylvania tax breaks, and they have a 20% property tax cut from Philadelphia itself. Now, there are several other entities in Philadelphia that are very well respected, very well financed, and also don't pay property taxes. That can be a conversation for another time. But yeah. So not only are they getting enormous profits, like outrageous profits.
That'll go higher during COVID, probably.
You know, and the CEO, he gave $5 million to the school district, and that was lovely, and you make like $30 million every single year.
Thank you.
So thanks, but let's stop. Like, let's keep,
And that's been one of the most annoying parts of this to me, is that there's this true doublespeak happening all the time, where like the cable companies are patting themselves on the back and getting a press release on the $5 million they gave while they're robbing $50 million. They signed this Keep America Connected pledge, except they don't. Mm-hmm. They have Internet Essentials, except it's not. It's all this smoke and mirrors where it sounds like they're actually helping. And if you read some of the stuff from the FCC, they brag about all the things they're doing for folks, and they're not.
Right.
They aren't doing the essential thing that needs to happen, Like it's not 5 million is nothing. Like you said, so he gave like 2 months of his salary or something like that. Ooh,
Right.
that is nothing. And again, it's a restructuring of the way we set this up. And I like the question from Mr. Wright here, the right stuff. So I do think we have reached out to the FCC. I did talk to the chief of staff from one of the commissioners as well as one of the media people. I hope that we will have one of the more progressive FCC commissioners on to help talk to us about what we can do, how to pressure them. They have been, they have seen the petition and have been paying attention to it. I think that folks don't like to be in the spotlight when they're trying to show themselves as being out there for the people, and then the people are kind of saying, no, you're not. So I think we need to folks should keep signing this. We'll try to identify, you can see our Brightbeam page. And we will start to identify some places where they're doing hearings and things like that so folks can push in. They do these kind of Twitter forums that we've been hitting up a little bit and just kind of been pushing Internet for All in that. But I do think kind of reaching out to the FCC commissioners, following them on their pieces when they do these public and holding them accountable as they're patting themselves on the back when they're really patting a cable company on the back. I'd say that's part of it, but I hope we get an FCC commissioner on who can really help us navigate this a little bit more. Yeah, I agree. I think with this administration, the political will's going to be tough, as Ms. Elverum said. But as Zach said, anyone you talk to about this, it's just like this is so logical that kids should be online. And I do think when we look even across the spectrum politically, the most disconnected areas are actually like Mississippi and some of the red states. And so I do think even within the red states, there's probably a push around this too. They recognize the economic future of their state is tied to connectivity. If half the families in your state can't get online, those kids are not learning. Those families will not be as economically productive. In the same way, we put up a highway infrastructure that connected the whole country together. The federal government paid for it, and it increased economic productivity of everywhere. Right. Same thing happens with a federal infrastructure on broadband.
Right.
So yeah, I think that we got to just keep pushing it, and there is a possibility right now. I think I just think we have to have that possibility. I'd love to go to the complaint right now. I just think we want to actually show what folks are going through, and I'd love to hear your reaction to this, Zach.
Yeah, and as it's coming up, when I think about the FCC, and I think about right.
Sorry, I think they're trying to put it up.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure that I actually heard that. I don't know if that's something we could replay again or that's kind of read it. Looking to the host.
One thing I was thinking before was when accessing the FCC, right, with the complaint we have and the petition that we have to really rather come at them. I think it's important to do that and to come at Comcast and to come at all of these folks. I think, right, we can't just rely on the government to do their job, and we can't just rely on the free market to think about anything but profit, right? We need to be able to get all of them at the same time. So I think that's just a really important thing to keep in mind. So yes, we can share this petition, get as many signatures as possible, make it as public as possible and as visible as possible, and ensure that we also are ensuring that our demands to Comcast and the others are just as visible as well, to ensure that we have as much chance for success as possible.
Where does the guy from Comcast live? Do you know? I
do not.
That might be interesting protest to bring it to the front door.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I've been trying to just think about how to get folks really to understand how hard it is. Like, again, we have these little problems with our internet and we freak out about them. Even just getting you on the show, it's like we had to get you to a place where you could do, but to not have access at all during COVID.
No, people can't put their phone away for a day. People can't put their phone away for a day. And just imagine, and I also, like, when I think about talking to parents who are so rightfully nervous and anxious and terrified of, well, what if my student misses a year? Like, what if? And these are students with connectivity. Like, what if he's behind in reading now? Like, what if, like, and that's with connectivity. Just imagine a family that has nothing.
Yeah.
Just like, well, I guess there's no school. I guess there's no school.
Yeah.
It's unacceptable.
Yeah. Again, the research is kind of saying, you know, they did some online research, just kind of using online assessments for a set of students in math. Middle and high income students didn't lose any learning over this period.
Wow.
Low income students lost a year.
Right.
So I think we're going to try to play the actual piece one more time. We'll give it one more shot. If not, we'll just kind of we'll close it out without doing this. But I do think it's important that folks kind of hear what folks are really going through. Can we play it? Can't hear it.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe save it for when we talk to the SBC.
Yeah, maybe that's going next time, brother. Cool. Well, I just appreciate you joining me. I know you and your family are getting away for the weekend, so I want you guys to have a great time, and I appreciate you putting in the time for our babies. It's critical, the work that folks like you are doing for our babies, and I appreciate you individually for kind of taking on the issues that I think many educators struggle to look in the mirror on, and kind of confront those head on. So I appreciate that 100%, brother. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with us?
I really hope that when I say we, I'm talking about predominantly privileged white people, that as our timelines come back to normal and as our Instagram feeds and Twitter feeds and Facebook timelines look less revolutionary, that we don't stop the work. That, you know, because there was this fashionable trend of selfies at the protest. And I remember I was trying to learn about what I should do with that. Like, do I take our family we went to protest, my 7-year-old, my 3-year-old holding signs. And I was like, do I take a picture of this to heighten it or do I not? And I reached out to folks whose teachings I trust. And they're like, no, those are for you. Like, you keep those here. And so I really, and I think it's incumbent upon folks like me to ensure that our quiet little neighborhoods don't stop the work just because the moment has passed. So that's where I'm leading here, is like, there's so much work to do. And when the moment passes, because it will pass, when it's not fashionable, when it's not a social necessity that you have it on your timeline, that you still do the work. And that predominantly for white people like me, the work starts with us. It's work doing with ourselves, so that every time we sit in our privilege, every time our children sit at their keyboards and do their learning, that we don't just think, wow, it's a shame 15 million students don't have access. It's not a shame. It's an injustice, and it is incumbent upon us to fight against that injustice.
I appreciate that, brother. That's a great way to end the show. And thank you. And the folks watching, please sign and share the petition. Please keep watching, and please fight where you are and also nationally to make this change that we need. Access is the starting point. We fought against segregated schools was like an issue. What the fuck? You can't even get to school. So let's fight for this and make this real. We can change this. In the same way we put interstate highways down, we can have interstate broadband for everyone who needs it, a place where everyone can get on, a ramp, like you said, Zach, so that every kid can get to school. That's what we owe them. So thank you so much. Appreciate you for being a part of this. Appreciate everyone who joined. Please follow up, follow us, follow the show, and help us fight for this. These kids need it. Thank you.
Thank you.